This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, folks, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and this is episode number 288 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. And so glad you've joined me, and hope you'll take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast. So I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Danielle Branche Brown. And Danielle is no stranger to this podcast. She was on the podcast earlier. I think maybe it's been a year or two now. I'll have to go back and look, but it was always good to reconnect to folks like Danielle and just our conversation around being authentic and really genuine with people in our sessions, and also talk a little bit about what it means to maybe share a little bit of our own lives with our clients. I know that for a lot of us in our training, we were really taught to be kind of that blank slate therapist. And I know I've had this same conversation with some other therapists here, but one of the things that I've learned over the years is that I think when you do a little bit of self-disclosure and really kind of share with people a little bit of our own struggles as human beings, it goes a long way with really validating the things that they're going through. And so Danielle and I talk about that particular topic, and looking forward to you hearing from Danielle. But before we get to my conversation with Danielle, I'd love for you to go over and check out some of the resources we've got, and in particular, the various communities we've got with the practice of therapy. There's a community just called the Practice of Therapy Community, which is a free community for anyone that wants to join. All of my communities are now housed on the Circle platform, and one of the reasons for doing that is I just really didn't want to have to battle with all the social media algorithms and that sort of thing. So the Circle platform is probably kind of similar to something like Facebook or LinkedIn as far as how you share stuff. But anyway, I'd love for you to go over and find out more about that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/community. And the other thing that I've got going on right now is this particular episode is coming out, I've got a new cohort of my focus group that's getting ready to start. It's the Group Practice Focus Group. And this particular group, it's a mastermind group, and it's specifically for those folks that maybe have smaller group practices, in particular group practices that are also insurance-based. And so I've got that group that's going, and I'd love for you to go check it out and join this next cohort. Our cohorts run for 6 months, so it gives us time to kind of dive in deep with each other and talk about the different things that we're working on. And so that's starting this month, in the month of July. We haven't set the specific date yet, but I'd love for you to go over and apply. And this group is going to be a small group. I'm limiting it to just 8 people. And that way we can just get to know each other well and really be supportive of each other. This last cohort that's finishing up was a great cohort of people, wonderful therapists, and in smaller group practices and just really helping each other navigate some of the things that are unique to smaller group practices that are also insurance-based. So go over to practiceoftherapy.com/focus group and find out more about that. I'd love to have you join us and apply. And if you, as always, you can reach out to me if you have any questions about that. And also, real quickly here, before we get to my conversation with Danielle, I'd love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft Network and also our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi, I'm Whitney Owens. If you don't know me, I am the person behind the Wise Practice podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. I am so proud to be a part of this network, along with my good friend, Gordon Brewer, who's doing such amazing work on helping people on their practice journey. If you haven't discovered the Wise Practice podcast yet, you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'd love for you to join us as we explore how to grow a faith-based practice that brings you the income you need and the lifestyle you want. Be sure to check out the podcast and other helpful information at whitneyowens.com. There you will learn more about the Wise Practice community, how to become a member, as well as information on the 2023 Wise Practice Summit. And hey, Psychcraft Network is a sponsor, so hope you can make it.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so happy to have back with me on the podcast, Danielle Branche Brown. Hi, Danielle.
Hey, how are you?
It's good to have you back. And
as
we were chatting ahead of time, I can't remember quite when it was, but it's probably been at least a year or so since we last chatted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to our conversation today, just about just all the stuff about being a therapist and, you know, what all that entails. But if for folks that don't know you, why don't you tell folks a little more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Sure. So I've been very real with people these days about my realization as I unpacked and started doing, not started, but continued some pretty deep inner child work and things like that, that I realized my initial choice to become a therapist was quite a codependent one. And I've also realized that I'm not alone in that decision, right? That a lot of us come to the decision to be therapists and be helpers and healers out of spaces of pain, right? Out of a need to find healing for ourselves, right? Out of some gap or some wound, right, that we have either experienced or seen or whatever, right? And so I really, truly have been real with myself and the people around me about that fact, right, that I grew up in Baltimore City, right, single mom, not seeing very many healthy relationships around me, right, not really feeling like I was witnessing a whole lot of thriving in my community, just in general, right? As a Black woman, being raised by a single mom. And I think there was this part of me, right, that was like, I want to help people. I need to be a part of the fixing, the saving, the healing, right? Whatever language you want to use, right? And so as I've done a lot of my work, all right, my passion has always been couples work and relationship work, recognizing that our attachments, our connections, right, our experiences and our relationships are a huge part of what makes us who we are, what makes up our worldview. And, so it's always been a value of mine. But as I've done my healing work and, really been focusing on my own like personal alignment and like codependent no more, right? Hashtag read the book.
Right.
I've gotten to a space where really I am wanting to do, and I am doing less of the like therapy, fee for service style of showing up for the community and for the field of mental health, and more taking a holistic approach to healing, right? Recognizing that healing, well-being, wellness, right, it goes so beyond the therapy room, right? That we can show up for 50 minutes every single week for the rest of our lives and not change a thing, right? If we're not being intentional about applying those things to our everyday lives and figuring out how to translate, right, what we're getting from the therapy space into wellness. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is workshops, trainings, community education, community events, just to, as the world, I think, and as communities are destigmatizing therapy, trying to take it a little bit further and destigmatizing wellness as a whole, right? So we're doing like crafting corners where we're doing series is like beading for self-care, right? We're tapping into our creativity and showing people that self-care and like showing up for yourself does not have to always be this like big, intense, deep, jargony thing, right? That sometimes you can just make a bracelet and feel really mindful in that process, right? And do that with a group of people who are talking about wellness and family and love and spirituality. And so I think have gotten to a space of maybe like less pressure, like less of the should statements of what my presence in the mental health field is supposed to look like, right? So we've been doing movement therapy classes, which is very much helping folks to, and honestly, I'm getting a lot out of it too, right? To really connect to the mind-body connection, right? Recognizing that regulating our nervous systems and like feeling empowered and safe within our physical selves is a huge part of emotional, mental, spiritual, relational wellness, right? That like if I don't feel comfortable and safe and empowered in my own body, me showing up for a partner, I mean, that's going to be hard, right? Like, so anyway, doing a lot of this like from the inside out style of helping folks create safety and space and alignment.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me as you're saying all of that is I think what you've landed on is something that's been on my radar, especially over the last year or two, and that is the healing power of community.
Yeah.
And that when we're going through tough stuff, and we learned this, the silver lining to COVID has been the fact that when we get isolated, we don't do well. When we get disconnected from people and disconnected from our community or people that we feel safe with and all of that sort of thing, that's when things can really take a nosedive for us. I think emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, all of that, all that sort of thing. And so I think you're doing something that is really pretty brilliant in that. I like that term of the inside out, of really looking at what is it that, recognizing as a person that is a therapist, a helper, all of that sort of thing, recognizing, okay, what I need is no different than what other people need. And so how can I help them with that?
Yes, that's exactly the space that we are coming from, right? That the style of training of like blank slate, and like somehow I'm supposed to leave my human self at the door when I come into the therapy room, but also I'm supposed to know everything. There's just like very unrealistic expectations floating around that that really creates a lot of shame, I think, for a lot of us, because it's inevitable that we won't live up to those expectations. Like it just is inevitable, right?
I'm with you. And I'm going to say an amen here, because that's exactly the kind of stuff that I've been thinking a lot about in recent years, is that, and particularly my work with people, doing supervision with people that are in the middle, going through the licensure stuff, what we get trained in our graduate programs and all that sort of thing, the whole thing about the blank slate. I've kind of figured out that's not always so helpful to people. I think there's a lot of therapy and a lot of healing that can occur by a little more self-disclosure about sharing, okay, I understand what you're going through because I've gone through the same thing. And this is what I found works for me. And doing that in a therapeutic setting and being able to get people to feel safe and be able to share things in a safe place is just huge in my mind.
Yeah. And I think research has shown that the relationship between helper and like person who is showing up to help themselves is one of the number one key components to growth and change and safety, right? And so like connecting human to human, we know is the key to success, but then somehow in our training that gets lost, right? In the sort of practice of therapy. And so oh, look at that. I used that.
Yeah. It just gave me a free plug there. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. Like, that's really what we are focusing our energy and attention on. And like, really just creating safe space and programming for clinicians specifically to begin to learn what that means for them in the field, right? Like to really acknowledge, like own, respect their experience of that, and then begin to build from there, right? Not just sitting in it and sulking in it and like being mad about it, right? Like being mad about it and then making choice about what that means moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. What does alignment look like? What does really freeing up your human self to be a part of the process look like?
Right. Yeah. I love that concept you were talking about, just with doing like crafting and that kind of thing. I don't have it on right now, but one of the things that I started doing recently, and I get my friends tease me about it, but I started doing those paracord bracelets.
Yes,
those survival bracelets and stuff like that. And it's just, there's something about it, just working with your hands and being able to create something that is just healing. And I think that doing that in the context of a community where you're both kind of working on the same things, but then you're having these deep, meaningful conversations about what's going on in your life and that sort of thing. I'm reminded of, at least, I think about probably our grandparents and that sort of thing. And with it being summertime, as we're recording this, just thinking about sitting on my grandmother's porch and breaking beans, from the garden, just, green beans and are doing something along those lines, just, and then just having those conversations. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely been just an eye-opening experience, right? Recognizing the importance of community. I think it's almost like I found out that we were complicating the process of healing. Like it's almost as if we weren't trusting the fact that our brains and our bodies want to heal. Like our brains and our bodies want freedom for us. And like our natural processes, like the regulation of the nervous system and all these sorts of things, like we were built for growth
Mm-hmm.
and healing and survival and evolution and all these things. And sometimes we just have to get out of our own way and just create space that feels connecting.
Right.
And
Right.
that like if we can just simplify
Yeah.
sometimes, at least sometimes, right, the process,
Mm-hmm.
then our bodies and our brains can be free to do that healing work by connecting with other people that feel
Mm-hmm.
safe.
Yeah.
Um,
So we talked about this a little bit, but what, if you don't mind sharing, what were some of the catalysts for you of changing the way you're thinking about how
mhm.
we do therapy and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think for a while I felt burnt out. Right. So I've been doing therapy for 10 years. And I think maybe in 2019, 2020, like when the pandemic started and things like that, I really started to feel the burnout setting in. And as I like unpacked it and did my own therapy with my therapist and journaled and all these sorts of things, I really realized that I was not burnt out. I was misaligned because every time I would take a break and I would come back to it, I would be burnt out again within like a month or something. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you know, like this is not about needing a break. This is not about, oh, I need to take better care of myself in order for this to like feel better. No, this is because this thing, like this way of showing up feels misaligned with me and like my beliefs and my values and my identity and all these different things. And so I started processing why, like, what is this misalignment? Like, where is it coming from? Right. And that's when I really started to realize how many should statements were wrapped up in it, right? Like how many things I was doing, because I felt like that's what I was supposed to be doing, right? Or
Yeah.
that's how I was supposed to be doing it, right? Or that's when I was supposed to do it. Like, so I was able to, once I assessed the fact that it was a misalignment and where it was coming from, I really started to recognize that, man, there are some gaps, right? Like there are some things that we're not as a community doing well
Mm-hmm.
always, right? In terms of like our teaching and holding space for ourselves and for like the actual community of helpers and healers.
Mm-hmm.
Then, like you were saying this earlier, Gordon, I started doing supervision and then
Mm-hmm.
it was affirmed and it was like, oh, snap. I'm not the only an individual experience for me. This is happening in our field,
Right.
right? And I realized just like the repetition, like I was hearing myself over and over again in
Mm-hmm.
my supervisees. And I was like, oh, like this is a problem.
Yeah.
And so that really was like professionally some of the catalyst type stuff. But then on a personal level, I spoke to you about this, Gordon. I lost my grandmother a couple of years
Mm-hmm.
back. And I think what grief does to your brain, at least my personal experience of it blew the walls out on so many of my
Mm-hmm.
frameworks and like paradigms, like so many of my like should statements and boxes that I've been carrying.
Mm-hmm.
It challenged so many of those
Yeah.
because of just like the unique experience that grief brings to you. And so
Mm-hmm.
I like that it almost was like a season where I began to give myself permission to challenge stuff, like where I
Mm-hmm.
really started to. Another piece of this is I remember in one of my therapy sessions where we were processing this grief of my grandmother, because my husband and I, we brought her in for in-home hospice. And I mean, it really was one of the hardest seasons of my life. And so I was processing this with my therapist, and we were talking about like the gifts that I got from my grandmother. I called her Nana, right? So gifts from
Mm-hmm.
Nana. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
thing that she used to say to me all the time was, girl, please. Like my grandmother was so, I don't want to say nonchalant, but like, what's the language I'm looking for? Like outside of the boxes. Like
Mm-hmm.
she, like I remember when she was here, I really, in many ways, thought my grandmother was kind of weird and like
Uh-huh.
kind of spunky. Like she was very like spunky and
Uh-huh.
like like, I think again before I used to see it as maybe like aggression or like
No filter, maybe?
like no filter, right?
Yeah.
And so as I like processed and like began to embody some of those attributes for myself, just starting to realize like maybe some of the spaces in her evolution that she had gotten to that I was not at, right?
Right.
Which is detaching from should statements, detaching from rigidity of systems that were not built for you, detaching from narratives that are not helpful but actually harmful and repressing, right? So anyway, I began using some of that self-talk from that gift that I got from my Nana, which is like when I find myself in some sort of overthinking, spirally shame-filled thing, I'm like, girl, please.
Right.
Girl, please.
Yeah.
Sort of giving myself the realization that is that life goes so much beyond and is so much bigger than any of the things and the stuff and the bullshit and the shit statements and and all these things, right? So anyway, so it was like a dual experience of like professional like burnout, misalignment, and unpacking of the stuff, right? And seeing myself and so many of my supervisees and some of the struggles that they have had in our field. And then, you know, having that experience of grief and loss and allowing that experience to really, honestly, it sounds so dramatic and I don't care, right? But to really transform the way that I like see things and life and boxes and structures and and should statements essentially.
Yeah. As you were talking about all that, Danielle, one of the things that just came to mind for me and just thinking about how we do things in our world and just how most of us were trained in graduate school and that sort of thing. We're kind of given this idea that this whole imposter syndrome idea would come out of graduate school thinking, oh, we're not good enough yet, or we're not qualified enough yet. And you've got to do jump through all these hoops and you've got to do all these things. And then we'll let you know when you're good enough, you know, or, you know, until you have this certification or that certification, or, you know, this many years of experience, you know, and I think it just feeds into this whole, all of the should statements and all of that sort of thing that you're talking about. And the truth of the matter is that I think anybody that, you know, I'm not saying that we don't need training, and I'm not saying that we don't need to understand how the human mind works and how all of those kinds of things, but a person's ability to help others is there, and don't cut yourself short on your effectiveness by thinking you should do this or you ought to do that, or once somebody rubber stamps you with a certain you know credential or whatever, then you're free to actually help people or whatever. You know, I don't know if that's getting at what you're thinking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. 100%. You're reminding me of, I did a CEU training and one of the participants, she said, she made a realization or made a point that like really goes with what you're saying, where we're maybe the only field, or at least one of the only fields that in order to feel good enough, we are like spending ridiculous amounts of money on training and certifications and things, not even like to make more money. It's not like, oh, I'm getting this certification and then my pay will increase. No, I'm getting this certification just to feel like I'm good at, just like I'm good enough for this part of the thing. Right? Like most fields, you go for this cert so that you can like go up in the ranks. Right. Like you spend this money to niche down or like to clarify your role so that you can like go into this other position with more money or whatever, right, to go up. That's not what it's like for us. We do that in order to feel like we're just good enough with where with what we're getting.
And the truth of the matter is that, and I'll probably get some kickback on this, but I think that our clients could care less whether we have those certifications or not. They just want a real person in front of them that understands what they're going through and can be there for them and be real with them and be genuine with them and offer them some sort of way to move through whatever it is that they're going through.
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree. Right. And just like you said earlier, it's not as if these things don't matter. Right. But I think we make those decisions out of a place of imposter syndrome instead of out of a place of like genuine passion, alignment, desire to do that particular thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, Danielle, I've got to be aware of our time and your time. And, I think we could have this conversation all day long. And it was, this is great and meaningful stuff. And kudos to you for, in a way, standing up to, conventional way of thinking of things. And let's figure out how to do this differently. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you so much, Gordon, for having me. I appreciate it.
And I hope we can do this again. Tell folks how they can get in touch with you and find out more about your work and what you have to offer.
Yeah, thank you. So we have an Instagram page where we are, giving out content and sharing with you what we're doing. That is branches.of.life.llc. Right. And then we have a YouTube channel called The Human Behind the Therapist that we actually just launched this year, and we're feeling really good and excited about, and people are responding well to. All right. So that's The Human Behind the Therapist. And then we also have our TikTok page, which is the same as the Instagram page, which is branches.of.life.llc. And then our website at www.branchesoflifetherapy.com.
Awesome. Well, Danielle, it's so good to reconnect with you, and we'll hopefully have another conversation here soon. Well, again, a big thanks to Danielle for joining me on the podcast. And I really love these kinds of conversations, having these meaningful conversations about stuff that probably we all think about internally. And I think Danielle was really hitting on something important for us all to remember, is not to buy into a lot of the imposter syndrome. I think there's sometimes, I think, particularly in our training, we come out of it thinking we're somehow or another inadequate in what we do, and that we've got to pay our dues and, have all this time spent. But I think we can all draw from our own life's experience and just really be able to have that translate into good clinical work, and being able to share a little bit about our lives and share with our clients. And I think the other big take home for me with my conversation with Danielle is find what feels genuine to you. And I think we don't have to always fall prey to the shoulds and ought tos, as I like to say. I know I said one of the things I'll say to clients sometimes: if you listen too much to the shoulds and ought tos, you'll just get should on. So that's my little bit of humor for the day. But again, thanks to Danielle, and you can find her at Branches of Life Counseling, and there'll be links here in the show notes and the show summary, so you can find out more about Danielle and her work. And also, I'd love to, again, extend the invitation for those of you that have maybe smaller group practices that are also insurance-based. I'd love for you to join this next cohort of the group practice focus group. Sorry, I don't have a more original name than that. But anyway, this mastermind group, my next cohort, is getting ready to start. And I'd love to have you as part of that community as we get started with that for this next 6 months. And you can find out more about that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/focus group to to apply and find out more about that. And also, before we go, big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and absolutely couldn't do without them. So kudos to them for doing all that they do. You can check them out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure and use the promo code just Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. So that's it for this particular episode. Do take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast, and look forward to being back in your ears and in your lives next week. Take care, folks. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.